Well, we are continuing our series in John, and I'm getting into it right away because we've got a bit to cover today. I mentioned last week it's going to be a little shorter last week. This week we're covering more ground, but man, has it been fun preparing. So we're in week 3 of this kind of mini series right in the middle of John 11 called Trusting Jesus. Trusting Jesus. Right in the middle of this book, we have this amazing series of events that takes place. The first week we talked about trusting Jesus in the dark times, in times you can't see, in times that you don't know what's around the corner, at times when you have no clue what's going on, you believe God is good, and in the situation as it's unfolding in John 11, these people know that Jesus is the Christ. We've got people who are around him, I should say, know that he's the Christ, the disciples, and as he goes to Martha and Mary and the crowd, there are so many believers in the crowd, but they couldn't see what was going to happen because they were still kind of in the dark at this point. Last week we talked about trusting Jesus in hopeful times. And what we see is this first encounter when Jesus comes in to Bethany, or just outside of Bethany, he encounters Martha first. And Martha talks to him, but she makes this statement that to me as I'm reading it has this element of hope, where she says to Jesus, well, earlier she says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But then she says this, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Even now. Lazarus is dead day 4, right? That comes in. He's been dead for 4 days. Probably was dead at the time that he got the message that Lazarus was sick. Then he waits 2 more days. It's a 2-day journey. Jesus knows what's going on. And so he waits for this 4th day, planning on already. He already knew what will happen. He even speaks to Martha, Martha, your brother will rise. But then she starts getting into her head, explaining it away. I know we're going to all rise on the last day. And Jesus had other things in mind. But Jesus is the only one who is qualified to do something like this. This is basically the launch of what happens over the next 2 weeks. John 11 through John 21 is the next 2 weeks of Jesus' ministry. And he says this to Martha. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? If you weren't here last week, we kind of went into depth about the series of this word belief and believe and what it means and how it unpacks and how it kind of shifts and changes through it. So look up the notes from last week or watch last week's message. But this word hope in the Greek means to wait with full confidence. Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen. So Martha was tracking with Jesus. She was, as he's saying, even I am the resurrection and the life. Martha's like, yes, I believe, I agree. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into this world. So she's made this proclamation like no one has ever proclaimed yet, in such a complete statement and in such a way that we have this statement that to us, when we read that, we're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense because we've got the whole Bible and the whole New Testament. It all unpacks just great. This was a very profound statement that Martha made in this moment. Yes, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who's coming into the world. And on that mic drop, she goes to get her sister. That's where we find ourselves in verse 28. John 11:28 through verse 37, we're going to cover right this moment, says, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here calling for you. This word teacher is interesting because it's not a common word that a woman would describe another woman about. Because to call him teacher means that you would be the student, and they wouldn't necessarily see themselves as a disciple of Jesus in that culture. That was a place reserved for men. And so there's this interesting, powerful little snippet right here we see, the teacher. Remember Mary, we'll get into it a little bit more. She was definitely a student, a pupil of Jesus. And so there's this common name they had for him. Verse 29, and when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews were there, or with her in the house, consoling her, and saw Mary rise quickly and got out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he have opened the eyes of the blind, or could not he who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? Jesus has an encounter with Martha. Martha goes to get her sister Mary. Mary comes, and we see, it's really neat that through the gospel that we see their characters, even through all the gospels where they've been mentioned, their personalities are really consistent all the way through. And here is Mary, who was listening at the feet of Jesus in Luke 10. Here's Mary, who in the next chapter we will see anoints Jesus' feet with this costly perfume and wipes them with her hair. This consistent personality, one of deep, personal, and close love for Jesus. In all three places that we have recorded of Mary, we see her in this place of humility at the feet of Jesus. She was totally honest with Jesus, as was her sister. Mary's always the one who has been seen, who has made the right choice, chosen what was right by sitting at the feet of Jesus, Jesus says to Martha, as Martha is worried about all the stuff that was going on in hostings, like, yeah, my sister should be helping me. In fact, she should be with me, but she's in this inappropriate place at your feet. What's going on here? And Jesus is saying, don't stop her. She's making the best choice of all. Mary's a wonderful example of what it takes, or what it is, to take full advantage of a situation. One who hungered for all that Jesus had, one who worshiped without regard for what would cost her, one who fell at the feet of Jesus weeping, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It was the same thing that Martha said. It was probably something they spoke together. If only Jesus had been here. If only Jesus had been here. If only the teacher was here, our brother would not have died. It's the same thing that Martha said. They knew that Jesus could do it. They knew he could heal them. They'd likely seen Jesus do miracles like this. They've seen others have major breakthrough, but they were not experiencing that breakthrough in that moment for themselves. Have you ever experienced anything like that? It's like, God, I need a breakthrough. I need something to shift. I need something to change. I know you can. I've seen how you have. God, I need that breakthrough. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing in this passage today. I know it's not listed specifically, but we're seeing this process. So we're calling this third message, Trusting Jesus for Times of Breakthrough. Because Martha and Mary were at the end of their rope. They had hoped that Jesus would do something even now, as Martha puts it. This word breakthrough, an act or instance of removing or surpassing an obstruction or restriction. Breakthrough, a significant development or discovery. Breakthrough. when you have no way of seeing how it will finally get you to the next level or place, you need a breakthrough. In this moment, Martha and Mary needed this. They had no idea what was coming up. Jesus told the disciples that this was going to happen in so many terms. Jesus said early in verse 11, I'm going to go to waken Lazarus. But they're still trying to figure it out too, because this is so outside of anybody's thoughts or imagination. But I love how this unpacks. I love how Jesus walks with them through this process. If you can imagine you were there when all of this took place, hearing Mary say to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, if you'd have just been here, where were you? We sent word. If you'd have just been here, Lazarus would not have died. But he did. Not only did he die, he's been dead for 4 days. Where have you been? Earlier in the gospel, in this chapter, Jesus says, because Jesus loved Martha and Mary, he did what? You remember the word? He waited. Say with me, waited. Waited. Is that what you want when you pray for God to do a miracle? God to wait? Not in America. We want it all now. Jesus waited. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. This statement that had been repeated, it's interesting that Jesus here did not defend himself. Jesus didn't stop to teach her what he was about to do. Jesus didn't say, hey, Mary, just hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I've got some really cool things coming. Just hang on. He doesn't do that. Instead, Jesus responds. He listens. He observes what's going on, and he engages right where they're at. Jesus is completely connected with the people that are there. I love that. When Jesus saw her weeping, verse 33, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Deeply moved. And greatly troubled. This word deeply moved is to be very angry or to be moved with indignation. It was called like the snort of a horse. Can you picture that? I go straight to the Lord of the Rings, the ring wraiths. You're just like, there's this indignation. The snort of a horse. There's almost invariably what comes with it is some inaudible, this thing is going to kill me. Certain inaudible or unintelligible kind of expression. Have you ever experienced that when something happens and you're so just beside yourself? You're so indignant. You have like my dog the other night rolling in some stuff. He smelled probably a lot like Lazarus. And it was like, oh. Horrible. And Jesus replies in something like a deep rage. I was pondering this. What would Jesus have been enraged about? Could it be something that God has not necessarily kept completely silent, but has wrestled with since the beginning of creation, since Adam and Eve chose to rebel, since death entered the world? And there is this indignation, there's this deep trouble that is Jesus is reminded of. Maybe there was a picture of the rebellion even in the garden. Oh! Maybe there's this rage just over the idea of death itself. Could it be that Jesus was also looking ahead at how death would be defeated and the cross that was to come. But in this moment, Jesus was deeply moved and greatly troubled. It has this idea of this bodily, like an agitation. He was beside himself. And so some of you, like me, could say, stop a moment. Didn't Jesus know what was going to happen? Didn't Jesus know what was coming? I mean, if we walked into, a group of friends and everybody's watching the beginning of the football game, you know that you end in victory. I mean, it feels disingenuous to join them in their frustration when they get called for another offsides. It feels ingenuous or disingenuous, doesn't it? But it's not. Because Jesus has entered into this place with them. Jesus is fully present with what is going on with the people that he's with. Doesn't that give you encouragement and hope? We've got in our Bibles the promise of a great and glorious finish. That doesn't make today easy. We know there will be a day for those who are following Jesus. There will be a day when death will be no more, standing face to face with him who died and rose again. Come on, we just sang it. We know that is coming. Yet, in this day, there can be stuff. I wasn't going to say that other word. You're like, you started with a different sound. But it happens. So this deep rage, this deep pain, Jesus held both. And he held it with great emotion. Does this compare with any other religion? It doesn't. Jesus saw the pain. Isaiah 53 tells us that Jesus, or the one who would come, the Messiah, who we now know as Jesus, is one who is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We see that Jesus had compassion throughout the Gospels. He had compassion on the people in Matthew 9, like sheep, like those who were sheep without a shepherd. And before he feeds the 5,000, he has compassion on the crowd. In Luke 7, we also see that Jesus had compassion on a widow whose son had died. And he was going to bring that son back to life. There's this idea of compassion. Jesus is right there with us. It gives the opportunity for the author of the book of Hebrews in chapter 4 to say that he can empathize with our weakness. We have a high priest who can empathize with our weakness. He was right there with them. He joined them. He was in the middle of it. There is no other system of belief, my friends. There is no other religious system that has anything close to Jesus. If you ever start questioning again your walk in faith, or you ever start getting dry and you're like, is this worth it? Am I doing the right thing? Go back to Jesus. Go back to the red letters. They remind us who he is. Jesus says in verse 34, in response to this, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus invites their participation, and he goes there. And it says in John 11:35, literally my first memory verse ever, Jesus wept. John 11:35. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? What is the answer to that question? Yes. Yes, he could. And he did. He healed a lot. He healed many, many, many people. Probably thousands of people. So yes, he could have. Lord, come and see. And then Jesus weeps. It's interesting that this word for weep is different than the earlier word for weeping. When Mary and the others were weeping, it's a different word. It implied a loud wailing. It implied this outward expression. They had a belief that the loudness and the demonstration of their mourning demonstrated their respect for the one who had died, demonstrated their respect for those who were living, demonstrated a sincerity of how much they loved that one. This word where Jesus wept in John 11:35 is a little different. It wasn't the same kind of loud demonstration. His loud demonstration had already come over his indignation over death itself, likely. But here it's this weeping of a crying, a quiet kind of nature. But he was 100% there. It's interesting that word for wept in Jesus wept. That's the only time in all of the New Testament that word is used. When we say that Jesus was fully God and fully man, this is what we see. This miracle of Lazarus rising from the dead is the best demonstration you could find on Jesus being fully God and fully man. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that Jesus was fully man, to be able to identify with us. One commentator put it this way: Jesus and humanity in its perfection, and humility unadulterated, is generous and sympathetic. Another commentator points out that Jesus dignified the tears of others in the Bible who wept. Abraham wept over the death of his wife Sarah. Jacob wept when he wrestled the angel. David and Jonathan wept together in the situation they were in. And Hezekiah wept over his sickness. Josiah wept over the sin of the nation of Israel. Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet. He cried a lot. Poor dude. Tough call. Literally, like a really tough calling. So there was no hidden expression that Jesus showed. It was obvious to everyone. So much so, the people said, "See how he loved him." There's no question he was there. Mixed with that, some had empathized with Martha and Mary. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Yeah, he could have. But Jesus was about to do something that no one had ever even considered. Even though the Apostle Paul wasn't there at the time, he came to know Jesus personally at a later time. He writes these words that Jesus will do above and beyond anything ever thought or imagined. That is what we see here. Let's continue on. Verse 38 of John 11. Then Jesus, deeply moved again. Here is that same context that we saw earlier. He comes to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go." I know many of you have read this before, but wow. This story never gets old. Jesus tells them to take the stone away. And Martha says out loud what everybody is already kind of thinking, right? Lord, by this time there'll be an odor, for he's been dead 4 days. How many of you have stated the obvious to God before? You ever stated the obvious to God before? Lord, if I don't make this plane, I won't get there on time. Right? Like God doesn't know these things. He doesn't understand travel. God, if she doesn't say yes, we will not get married. Kind of obvious. Lord, if the Mariners don't win, they won't get to the World Series. We're like, yeah, true. Never seen it. I know these are silly things. I did a little looking at some of these signs. We have more. I don't know if we can maybe only just show one, but no trespassing without permission. There's this other one sign that I saw was a stop sign, and it had a sign underneath it. Do you have any more of these, Kathy? I know we were having troubles getting them up for some reason. But there's a stop sign, and there's a big sign, just as big as a stop sign underneath with an arrow pointing up, saying, "This is a stop sign." Have you seen those fences with pikes on them, right? These pikes that are like, they were meant to prevent people from climbing the fence, because if they slipped, it would be bad news. And there was a big sign that says, "Don't sit on the fence." Like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, there it is right there. Yeah. And though Martha was stating the obvious, there was something else that Martha was stating. Oh, yeah. That's a good one for Steve. Yeah, sea entrance. Yeah, just in case you need to know how to get into the ocean. Is that the last one there, Kat? You got them out. Awesome. Yeah. I've said stupid things like that before, right? Don't do that. It will hurt. Don't cut yourself. Really? But Martha while she was stating the obvious, she's also stating some other things, because it would be a moment of great embarrassment to the family to smell that. It would be humiliating if something went wrong. But Jesus, what if this does? I don't know what you're doing, but this makes no sense to me. What if this just doesn't go to plan? Maybe Martha was stating, Jesus, I've heard enough. I've hurt enough. Taking away that stone will only make things worse for me. But Jesus replies, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Question for you. Was Jesus saying if you don't believe, Lazarus wouldn't rise? Is that what Jesus is saying here? If you believe, Lazarus will rise. So if you don't believe, Lazarus won't rise. That seems logical to me, right? And there is so much false doctrine being passed around in church today that says that God cannot move until you believe. Have you heard that before? It's not biblical. Yes, we partner with Him and we believe. But God isn't waiting for us to okay, I'm just waiting. Do I have enough believers out there? Okay. Jesus was stating something else here altogether. They would be the ones who would be in the middle of it all. They would see the glory of God. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Some saw, and guess what? Didn't believe. In fact, it became a hinge-pin for those who were trying to discredit Jesus, some who were trying to kill Jesus. They had heard about this, heard it from eyewitnesses, had all the corroborating witness that they needed to prove this was true. They knew that they were all in this together. They saw the live body of Lazarus, and they still didn't believe. But what was Jesus saying here? If you believe, you will see the glory of God. Was this even something He said specifically to Martha? We don't see that. He says it to His disciples earlier. But he speaks these words, as we had read earlier, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe? All that Jesus was saying here, it includes that your belief will be more than just seeing Lazarus rise. You will see beyond the seeing. The same Martha who says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So verse 41, they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around. Jesus is establishing his relationship with with God. Remember, this has been something that's been in question throughout the Gospel of John, and the heat has been getting turned up and getting turned up and getting turned up. They were about to stone him a little bit earlier because he made statements that before Abraham was, I am. The people were like, what else? What other evidence do we need? Let's stone him. They started flinging stones, or about to, and he escapes. He just walks right through them. It wasn't time yet. Lazarus hadn't died yet. Lazarus hadn't risen yet. There was much yet to prove. Verse 42, I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around. They may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice. Say with me, Lazarus, come out. Say with me again, Lazarus, come out. The man who died came out, his hands, feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. This is a picture of what was prophesied about 800 years earlier in Hosea. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting? And Jesus, in just a couple weeks after this happens, will come out of his own tomb. Now, there's a big difference between Lazarus rising from the dead and Jesus rising from the dead. Lazarus came out still wrapped. Jesus comes out leaving all the linens behind. See, Lazarus would die again. Jesus had no need for those death cloths, did he? Lazarus came out by Jesus' command, but Jesus came out of his own tomb under his own authority. Lazarus was raised to demonstrate Jesus is God's Son. Jesus was resurrected to prove that he is the Savior of the world. Lazarus would return to that grave, but Jesus lives forever. Martha and Mary needed a breakthrough. There's no way around it. And their breakthrough came at a time when they had no idea what Jesus had in mind. Earlier I read these verses out of Ephesians chapter 3, or just alluded to them. Let's read them together. It says, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Forever and ever. Forever and ever. Amen. There were many that were involved in this breakthrough. You got Martha and Mary, the disciples, the observers, and of course Lazarus. Jesus sets the captives free as he proclaims of himself in Luke chapter 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim freedom to the captives. Freedom to those who are captives. What an amazing, powerful story of Jesus walking right there with his disciples and with those around, with Martha and Mary, those whom he loved dearly, walking with them all the way to unwrap him. Last week, I think I sent a hyperlink, didn't I, in the letter? They had this little clip in The Chosen. I think it's season 4, episode 7, I think, one of those episodes. And it shows this whole thing. What a great depiction they had of this event. I'd recommend seeing it if you haven't, because it just reminds you how powerful God is. So when we're praying for God to break through in our own lives, we see situations where our loved ones aren't making decisions that we want them to, and we've been praying for them forever, and they're still not making good decisions. God, give us breakthrough. For situations where you see the world around us, and you see what's going on and the frustration of what's happening in Ukraine, and you see all of these battles going on in the courts for life and death. Lord, give us breakthrough. You see the church in the middle of it all, trying to be light, walking, knowing that there will be a day when everything will break through. Lord, let it be today. Lord, let it be today. Lord, let it be in us that we ourselves would have breakthrough. You know, today I was going to bring a balloon, but I decided not to. But just join me for a moment as I take this balloon and kind of just tie it off. Holding it here. This balloon. What color is it? It's pink. Okay, fine. It's a pink balloon. You're wondering, what's he going to do with that balloon? What else would I do? You know, at first when you're poking into a balloon, it's easy, right? Your finger kind of just pokes in, no big deal. You know, I filed my nails, no big deal. Start pushing a little more. People start squirming a little more. Bam! I knew he would do that on stage. Oh! I don't know the science behind it. I actually tried to find it, Kendall. Couldn't find it. You can find it for me. But I know in my own experience, the greatest time of resistance is just before the breakthrough. Yeah. Press in. Press on. Don't give up. Jesus is right there. He is with you. He's not standing on the side saying, yeah, just get your act together and come see me sometime. Yeah, as soon as you get the verses right, as soon as you can say this thing right, as soon as you mean it enough, as soon as you believe it enough, you can come to me and I'll be there for you. Is that the Jesus we see in John 11? It's not. It's not. Jesus was right there. He joined them. He was there with them. With them. He was with them. That's the Jesus we serve. So if you're needing a breakthrough, don't stop. You may get startled when it finally comes, but it's coming. Worship team, could you come forward? Jesus speaks these words. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? I'll ask you this. The ones who enjoyed this miracle the most, kind of a very simple way of saying it, I guess. The ones who were the most deeply amazed, they were the ones who were there in the depths of despair, saying, oh, Jesus is right there with us. See how he loved him? And yet, in this place, they were the ones rejoicing. they were the ones rejoicing, and they were seeing the glory of God. I want to see the glory of God. How about you? You want to see his glory? You want to walk in that place of, not just in heaven, and I'm so grateful it's coming, but in this day, that we would walk in understanding that he is right here with us, understanding that his glory is for all who call on his name. And you wondering, boy, Bill, that just seems like it's too good to be true. It is so good because it's true. That's why Jesus died, that we would have freedom, that we would be set free from our own captivities, whatever they might be, that we would walk free. Not bound, but free.